President Harry S. Truman was the target of a coordinated attack by two assailants on his Washington, D.C. residence. Truman was not injured, but 3 Secret Service officers were shot in the extensive gun battle, one fatally. I'm Bob Summers, and this is a presidential story. Wednesday, November 1st, 1950, was an unseasonably hot day in Washington, D.C. The temperatures reached 85 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 29 degrees Celsius, the hottest November day on record at the time. President Harry Truman, First Lady Bess Truman, and her mother, Madge Wallace, had all been staying at Blair House, the presidential guest house, located to the northwest across Pennsylvania Avenue from the White House. They had moved there 2 years earlier while the White House was undergoing major renovations, and would be staying there for yet another year and a half. The 3 of them, President Truman, his wife, and mother-in-law, had lunch. Bess and her mother then retired to a room upstairs, while the president also went upstairs to take a nap before heading to Arlington National Cemetery to speak at the unveiling of a statue honoring British Field Marshal Sir John Dill, who had also been a member of the Combined Chiefs of Staff during World War II. Truman was scheduled to depart at 2:50 p.m. The current time was a little after 2. Due to the heat, Truman removed his clothes and opened the window of the second-floor bedroom. Then, in his underwear, he reclined on the 4-poster bed. Downstairs, the front door was open to allow a breeze through the house, but the screen door was closed and latched. Stationed on guard in the front hall was Secret Service Agent Stuart Stout. Except for the heat, it was like any other day. The leaves were falling from the trees while people, streetcars, and automobiles passed beneath the president's window. Overall, the house was quiet. Outside, 3 White House police officers, members of the Secret Service's Uniform Division, were stationed in the heat wearing their sweltering winter uniforms. Standing under the canopy at the bottom of the front door stoop was Private Donald Birdsell, facing toward Pennsylvania Avenue. To Birdsell's left and right were 2 white-painted guard booths on the sidewalk about 30 yards apart from each other. In the booth to the east, closest to Lafayette Square, was stationed Private Joseph Davidson. He was chatting with plainclothes Secret Service agent Floyd Boring. They were passing the time chatting about Davidson's glasses, which Boring had never seen him wear before. In the booth to the west was Private Leslie Coffelt. A 4th White House policeman, Joseph Downs, who Coffelt had just relieved of his post, was moving toward the basement door. The time was 2:19. It was at this time that 2 slim and unobtrusive men wearing hats and chalk-striped suits approached Blair House from different directions. The man approaching from the east was 36-year-old Oscar Collazo. Collazo, who had never fired a gun before, carried a Walther P-38. Approaching from the west was 25-year-old Griselio Tarasola. Tarasola, who had a lot more firearm experience, was carrying a German-made Luger. Between the 2 of them, they carried 69 rounds of ammunition. Both men lived in New York, were born in Puerto Rico, and were members of the Puerto Rican Nationalists Party, a group that had been fighting for Puerto Rican independence from the United States since 1922. On October 30th, 1950, 2 days before the assassination attempt on Truman, the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party violently tried to overthrow the Puerto Rican government. In retaliation, the U.S. Air Force bombed and strafed multiple cities in Puerto Rico, including Jayuya, the hometown of Tarasola and Collazo. This was the moment when the 2 decided to bring attention to the cause of Puerto Rican independence by killing the President of the United States, even though it would likely end with their own deaths. On October 31st, the 2 men boarded a train in the Bronx borough of New York City heading to Washington, D.C. When Tarasola and Collazo left their hotel room the next morning with their pistols in their waistbands, they decided to first spend some time sightseeing. They took a tour of the U.S. Capitol building and the surrounding area, then hailed a taxi and told the driver to take them to the White House. They were dropped off at 15th Street. As they each neared Blair House, Torresola stopped at the window of Officer Coffelt's western booth and began saying something in a loud voice, apparently in an effort to divert attention away from Collazo, who had already passed the eastern booth where Officer Davidson and Agent Boring were chatting. Officer Birdsell stationed at the base of the front stoop when he heard the faint, metallic click of a gun's trigger being pulled. The gun novice Collazo had failed to first cock his gun, so it did not fire. Birdsell whirled around to see Collazo only 8 or 10 feet away, pointing his Walther P-38 at him. As Birdsell reached for his own gun, Collazo successfully fired his gun, hitting Birdsell in the right leg. Birdsell's first thought was to draw the gunfire away from Blair House and the president's position. So instead of shooting back immediately, and despite having been shot in the leg, Birdsell ran out into Pennsylvania Avenue. Birdsell's plan worked. Collazo pivoted and kept firing at Birdsell. Birdsell dropped by the streetcar tracks, turned on one knee, and returned fire. By now, gunfire had erupted everywhere. Pedestrians in the area screamed and ran for cover. In the front hall, Agent Stout had run to the gun cabinet, grabbed a Thompson submachine gun, and stood ready for a breach at the front door. Truman, hearing the gunfire, jumped out of bed and rushed to the open window. Secret Service agents on the street below shouted at him, "Get back, get back," until he moved away from the window. Back at street level, Torresola stepped into the open door of Coffelt's booth and fired at point-blank range, hitting Coffelt 3 times in the chest and stomach. Torresola then turned and fired at Officer Downs, who was standing at the basement door, hitting him 3 times. Downs struggled his way through the basement door, shouted out for help, then securely barricaded the door behind him. Davidson and Boring emerged from their booths and opened fire on Collazo. After a couple of minor wounds, Collazo was hit in the chest, dropping him face down on the sidewalk beside the front step, still wearing his hat. While the Collazo shootout was happening, Torresola turned to fire at Birdsell out by the streetcar tracks. Birdsell was struck in the other leg, but continued to return fire. Somehow, Officer Coffelt, who had taken 3 point-blank shots to the chest, managed to grab his pistol and brought down Torresola with a single shot to the head. As suddenly as it started, it was over. There were 27 shots fired in under 2 minutes. Then, for a few seconds afterward, it was eerily quiet. When the gunfire stopped, hundreds of people came running from every direction. More police and Secret Service agents, White House reporters, and photographers. Officer Birdsell lay motionless in the street as blood flowed from both legs onto the pavement. Officer Coffelt was sprawled on his back by his sentry booth. Officer Downs was dragged into a basement room where he asked for a priest. Collazo was prone at the front steps with severe injuries, but he was alive. Torresola was dead, doubled in a heap beneath a boxwood hedge. Truman quickly dressed and rushed downstairs. Truman's childhood friend and now press secretary, Charlie Ross, made his way through the crowd of police and reporters to reach Truman. Ross asked Truman if he was still planning to go to Arlington. "Why, of course," Truman responded. 15 minutes later, Truman left out the back door of Blair House with 8 Secret Service agents. Truman arrived at Arlington looking calm and uninjured, to the relief of those attending the ceremony who had just heard the rumors about the shooting. Truman kept to his prepared remarks without referencing the attempt on his life. While Truman was at Arlington, 2 workmen with a bucket full of soapy water appeared in front of Blair House to scrub off the bloodstains. Overall, President Harry Truman did not feel he was in any danger. A president has to expect these things, Truman told reporters the next morning when he went for his daily walk. It looked like any other walk, except for the dozen more additional Secret Service agents protecting him, some more heavily armed than normal. Truman had imagined that he would be able to take care of a would-be assassin like President Andrew Jackson did, who, when shot at, beat the deranged man with his cane. You can hear that story in episode 62 by clicking the link in the description. The Secret Service would not give Truman that opportunity. Even his daily walk across the street to and from the West Wing now required a ride in a bulletproof car. 4 hours after the assassination attempt, Truman learned that Private Leslie Coffelt had died at the hospital from his wounds, making him the first and still only Secret Service agent to die protecting the president. It was then that Truman became extremely upset. As Truman would later say when a plaque in Coffelt's memory was placed on a new iron fence in front of Blair House, Coffelt had been one of the best-liked officers on the White House force. Truman thought a lot about what happened. He thought the gunmen were stupid as they could be. He even wrote, "I know I could organize a better program than they put on." He knew his plan to attend the ceremony at Arlington had been in the morning paper. If the assassins would have waited another 20 minutes, Truman would have walked right out the front door. Something else that didn't make sense, Truman had already done more for Puerto Rico than any previous president. On several occasions, he had spoken in favor of the right of the Puerto Rican people to determine their political relationship with the United States. Truman also named the first native Puerto Rican as governor and extended Social Security to the people of Puerto Rico. As Collazo explained to the police, Truman was just a symbol of the system. You don't attack the man, you attack the system. But Collazo also shared with them that they were not even sure Truman would be at home at the time. The FBI also arrested Collazo's wife, Rosa, on suspicion of conspiring with her husband in the plot. She was held in federal prison for 8 months, but was never tried. Collazo was convicted on 4 counts, including Coffelt's murder. He was sentenced to death by electric chair. A week before his scheduled execution in 1952, as a gesture of goodwill towards the Puerto Rican people, Truman commuted the sentence to life in prison. In 1979, after 29 years in Leavenworth Penitentiary, Collazo's sentence was further commuted to time served by President Jimmy Carter. The official reasons for the commutation was that Collazo had already served a long sentence, and that Carter had been motivated by humane considerations. It is suspected the real reason is that Cuba agreed to release some of their American prisoners if Collazo and 3 other Puerto Rican nationalists convicted of shooting up the House of Representatives and injuring 5 congressmen in 1954 were released. Collazo died in Puerto Rico in 1994 at the age of 80. In 1951, in the wake of the assassination attempt, Congress passed legislation to increase the Secret Service's protection responsibilities to also include the president's family, the president-elect, and the vice president. The attempt on Truman's life was the event that created the modern Secret Service as we know it today. In 1952, Truman supported a Puerto Rican direct vote on a potential new constitution that would determine the island's future relationship with the United States. Nearly 82% of the voters supported the status quo, which had been established in 1950. Truman believed it all unnecessary. The people who really got hurt were wonderful men, he said. Officers Birdsell and Downs eventually recovered from their injuries and returned to duty. In addition to the plaque at Blair House to commemorate Coffelt's heroism, the day room of the Secret Service's Uniform Division at Blair House is named in his honor. Thanks for watching.